You ever hear of a ghost in the machine? I'm not talking about a bug, but the spirit of an idea. An idea so powerful it just refuses to die. Well, that's the story of Haiku, an operating system inspired by a classic from the 90s and kept alive by a super passionate community for more than 20 years now. Now, before you write this off as just some nostalgic pet project, take a look at this quote from ZDNet. I mean, we're talking about an operating system that's being praised for being blazingly fast, even by today's standards. So how in the world did this ghost from the past become a real contender for speed today? Well, it all started with an uprising. Okay, so our story kicks off back in the early 2000s, right as this really beloved tech company was about to fall. See, there was this operating system called BOS, and people loved it. It was famous for being super fast, having this really clean design, and it was an absolute powerhouse for multimedia stuff. It had this incredibly devoted following, but yeah, commercially, it just couldn't quite make it. And then it was over. So what happened? In August 2001, Palm, yep, the Palm Pilot people, bought B Incorporated. For most of the business world, this was barely a blip on the radar. But for the BOS community, it was an absolute disaster. The operating system they loved was officially gone. Or, so it seemed. And what's just incredible is how fast the community responded. I mean, literally the day after B Inc. was sold, a developer named Michael Phipps gets the OpenBOS project up and running. This wasn't a slow burn. This was an all-hands-on-deck rescue mission from the get-go. A couple years later, by 2003, they'd even set up a nonprofit, Haiku Inc., to help fund everything. And then in 2004, they landed on the name Haiku, partly because it's elegant, but also to, avoid any legal trouble with Palm. The thing is, they had a huge, huge challenge ahead of them. Okay, so here's the kicker. They couldn't just grab the original BOS code and keep going. Palm said no, they wouldn't license it. So the team, they had to rebuild the entire operating system from scratch. They had to painstakingly reverse engineer every little feature to build something new that could still run all the old BOS apps. And wow, this was the start of a very, very long road. So how on earth did they pull it off? I mean, building an entire OS from the ground up that's no small feat. It took years and years of pure dedication from volunteers, literally putting the whole thing together one piece at a time. All right, so first things first, they started with the absolute core, the kernel. They were able to fork a project from an ex-B engineer, which was a great start. Then they got a bit of a lucky break with the user interface. Turns out B had open-sourced key parts like the file manager and the taskbar right before they were sold. Phew, but to be a modern OS, they needed modern tools, right? Like a package management system. That was a massive project all on its own, and they finally got it done in 2013. As you can imagine, all of this led to, well, let's call it a very patient release schedule. And yeah, this timeline really puts the marathon, not a sprint, nature of this thing into perspective. The first alpha didn't come out until 2009. That's a full 8 years after they started. And then it took another 9 years to even get to the first beta in 2018. You gotta remember, this wasn't some big company with hard deadlines. This was a total labor of love, moving forward whenever the volunteers could find the time. And that work is still going on. The project is absolutely alive and kicking. The 5th beta just dropped in September 2024, which is just proof that this ghost is still very much making noise. So after all that time, what exactly did they build? What do we have today? So what's it actually like to use Haiku today? What makes it tick? And really, why does it feel so ridiculously fast? Well, it all boils down to a totally different philosophy about how you should build an OS in the first place. Okay, deep down at its core, it's running something called a hybrid kernel. Now, I'm not going to get super technical here, but just think of it as them trying to get the best of both worlds. They're trying to get the pure, raw speed you'd get from a simpler design, kind of like Linux, but combine it with the rock-solid stability you get from a more complex one. This right here is a huge part of Haiku's secret sauce for performance. And that design choice points to a really fundamental difference in philosophy. Think about it. Windows and macOS have gotten so incredibly complex, right? They're built for multiple users, they're running a million background tasks. Haiku just doesn't do that. It keeps its focus super narrow. It's built for one person on one computer doing their thing. The reason it's so fast is because it's not trying to be everything to everyone. And because of that sharp focus, you get a really unique set of features. For developers, there's a super clean and consistent API. For users, you get the classic tracker and desk bar from the original BIOS, which are legendary for how efficient they are. Of course, it has the modern stuff you need, like a package manager and a pretty decent WebKit browser. And this is the big one. It still aims to be compatible with all those original BIOS apps, which, fulfills that promise they made right at the very beginning. Which, of course, brings us to the big question. In a world that's completely dominated by a couple of giant operating systems, is Haiku really anything more than just a cool nostalgia trip? Does it actually have a place today? Well, if you look at the reviews, you can see just how far the project has really come. Go back to 2013, and Ars Technica was basically calling it a fun little curiosity for an old computer. But fast forward a decade, and ZDNet is just raving about its speed and design, even comparing it to another legend, NextStep. So clearly, it's grown from just a diversion into something genuinely impressive. But it's not without a little bit of controversy. Yeah, for the real purists in the open source community, there's a bit of a sticking point. The Free Software Foundation, the FSF, they don't officially endorse Haiku. Why? Because to get modern hardware, like your Wi-Fi card, to actually work, the OS has to include some little bits of non-free code, these firmware blobs. It's a practical choice, right? You have to do it to make the OS usable on modern machines. But it does mean it doesn't quite meet the FSF's super strict definition of free software. And all of this really just leaves us with one final thought. In an age where, let's be honest, just a couple of companies control almost everything, what's the real value of a project like Haiku? Is the goal to actually become a major competitor? Probably not. Or maybe its value is something else entirely. Maybe it's about keeping different ideas about computing alive. Maybe it's about showing what a small, dedicated community can achieve over decades. And maybe it's just about keeping this one particular ghost in the machine around, so we can all learn from it.